Guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm so excited about because we're going to be chatting about my most anticipated fantasy releases for this upcoming summer. Listen, we all know I love buying a book, I love reading a book, so anticipating upcoming fantasy releases is just something I really love, okay? Also, on a personal and channel note, I am trying to prioritize reading newer releases as they come out to be able to help field if I think a book is worth it or not before y'all spend any good money on it or waste a library hold. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into my most anticipated fantasy releases for this summer. And there are a few sci-fi books on here, but just a few. It is predominantly fantasy. Starting off for the month of June, I have The First Bright Thing, which comes out June 13th. This is a magical circus story, and honestly, I feel like this is becoming a genre, a subgenre in and of itself. I just feel like a circus, a dark magical circus, is a great setting for any type of fantasy story to unfold. In this story, we follow our main character, Rin, who is a ringmaster to a circus full of magical misfits. Here, she travels with her wife, who is also a trapeze artist within the circus itself. This book is set after World War I, and they're currently traveling in the Midwest, offering one-night enchanting performances from city to city, though threats begin to threaten the circus from all sides, including the possibility of an impending new war. This book seems to be an interesting combination of like a historical setting with obviously fantastical elements to it. I feel like it will also have social commentary. Again, I just feel like a circus historical setting is always a fun one to explore, so this is for sure on my radar. Next up, I have Translation State by Ann Leckie. Obviously, Ann Leckie is one of the most beloved and internationally acclaimed science fiction writers of our time. This is the first book to what I want to say is a new series by her, and it sounds really, really interesting and also is comprised of some plot elements I personally love. It basically follows three characters that come crashing into each other's life as they go on a mission to try to find a long lost translator. And this translator has been missing for over 200 years, and the person initially assigned to this task was kind of given it to keep them busy with no expectation actually succeeding. But this quest and adventure begins to set ripples across galaxies and time itself. It's said to be an adventure as well as a brilliant exploration of self, identity, and in order to belong, we must first become. This sounds like a really interesting novel. This just really seems like it could be a really intense plot forward story, kind of political thriller leaning, but also housing a bunch of characters you feel like you'll fall in love with, and I feel like will root this story so well. Ann Leckie is an author I've been wanting to read forever. I own many of her other books and maybe I should get to them first, but this book does come out on June 6, 2023. So by the time this video is up, it's actually available to purchase. I also am obsessed with the cover. The colors of this are stunning. Next up, I have The Library of Broken Worlds, which also came out on June 6th. And in the story, we follow our main character, Freda, and she is the daughter of the library god. She has spent her entire life living and exploring in all the tunnels of this massive library and also communing with gods through time. Also, her unparalleled access to this information makes her both unique and dangerous. At the beginning of the story, though, our main character runs into a mortal boy who is desperate to save his people, who are part of a religious minority who are being killed off. Freda is compelled to break the rules and dig deep into the bowels of the library to try to find an answer that could help this boy. But in doing so, she uncovers and unlocks secrets and atrocities of the past that the library and the gods have been trying to cover up. With the world on the brink of war, we follow Freda as she embarks on a quest in trying to fulfill her destiny. This book just sounds so interesting. Obviously, I'm a sucker for any library-centered story, but I also feel like our main character being like a daughter of a god living in this library is a really interesting concept, and obviously she has spent a significant amount of time living and exploring within these stacks. Given the expansive nature of the library itself, being a god might really be the only way to actually be able to explore the whole thing. So I just think the idea of this just sounds so interesting to me, and again, I'm just a sucker for a library. Next up, I have Morgan Is My Name, which comes out June 13th. This is a US release of an already published book in the UK. So if you're watching this in the UK, you're like, this book's already out. It's out for y'all, but it's coming out in the United States on June 13, which I'm so excited about. This story is just really an encapsulation of so many things I love in one. It is a feminist reimagining of the tale of Morgan Le Fay, who is the famed villainess from Arthurian legend. This story really seems to turn a lot of what we know of the Arthurian legends right on their head. Obviously, Morgan as the famed female magical user that we know very well in these ancient stories is really presented to us in a new way. The story itself is also told from her point of view. We follow her story as a young woman. After her father is murdered and her mother is forced to remarry, Morgan herself begins to learn the arts of magic, particularly the healing art. She marries below her station, but of course this defiance comes at a cost. This is her story. Again, I love any type of reimagining or retelling of an ancient tale. It's just something I always really enjoy across any ancient tale, any setting, any historical setting. I'm like basically there to consume it. This one particularly calls out to me because I think Arthurian legends are super cool and also really influence a lot of fantasy books. So I feel like I'd really enjoy a reimagining of this one in particular. Now moving on to the month of July, the first book I'm going to talk about is Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. You might recognize Chloe Gong's name because she is very well known for her YA fantasy series, but this is actually her adult fantasy debut, and I'm honestly very curious about it. I didn't love her YA books, but I'm curious to see how it would translate into more of an adult writing style, so I'm going to pick it up. Also, I will say from a plot point of view, I am curious about it. This is a fantasy retelling of the Shakespearean tale of Antony and Cleopatra. Clearly, Chloe Gong loves the Shakespearean retelling, which I think is really fun. This book is set in a fantasy kingdom where every year thousands flock to the main capital city because they have a set of trials where competitors compete to the death with the chance to win impossible riches. We follow two main characters who enter these trials for different reasons, and I think they also form an unlikely alliance and kinship. Will this also evolve into romance? I am not sure, but I'm curious about this one. Obviously, I do love a trials-based fantasy plotline. I really think it keeps things exciting and fun and fresh, so we will see. I'm definitely going to check this book out, and I'll for sure let y'all know what I think. Next book is Ebony Gate, which comes out July 11th, and I was completely sold by the marketing tagline of this book, which is a female John Wick story with dragon magic. I mean, they don't need to say anything else. I am already curious about how this book is going to unfold. In this story, we follow our main character, Miko, who is a retired assassin. Miko herself comes from one of the strongest magical families in all of the world. She's more notoriously known as being the sword of the clan, or was. Basically, her entire career was brought to a halt after she was drenched in blood in the middle of a market. Now she lives in an entirely new place and lives a very quiet life. But when a Shinigami appears at her door, calling in an old family debt, Miko is once again brought back into the business. This book just sounds really cool. I mean, female assassins, paralleling this to John Wick. I just have a feeling this book is going to be an absolute page turner, and I can't wait. The next book is The Weaver and the Witch Queen by Genevieve Gornichek, and this book comes out July 25th. I have read other books by Genevieve Gornichek, and I really enjoy them. She combines like history and myth and makes just some of the most enchanting stories I've ever picked up. And this book is definitely along that same vein. It focuses on history and myth from the Viking Age, which I personally don't know too much about. It's set in the 12th century in Norway, and it follows the lives of two women forever connected. One is desperate to save her missing sister, and the other is a witch destined to become the Queen of Norway. I think this is a story of bonds, female connection, and friendship. I also feel like it's going to be one with lots of action. I already know this author's writing is absolutely enthralling, and I'm just obsessed with how she's able to bring to life myth. I just feel like everything about this book personally calls out to me, and I feel like this could be a new favorite. The next book sounds amazing, and it is The Splinter in the Sky, and this book is said to be for fans of Nnedi Okorafor and N.K. Jemisin, two of my all-time favorite authors. And this book comes out July 11th, and the premise of this is literally everything for me. And it follows our main character who just wants to live a quiet and idyllic life as a tea salesperson and merchant. However, though, after their lover is murdered and their brother is kidnapped and brought to the capital, our main character transforms from a tea salesperson into a spy. Listen, I love any type of political thriller leaning sci-fi story. I think conceptually too, the setup of this sounds fantastic. I mean, going from a tea merchant to a spy, I'm just really curious to see like how that evolves in itself. Not to mention, I just feel like all of the topics the synopsis sort of hints at sounds really intriguing to me. And again, it called out two of my favorite authors, so this is an immediate pre-order. The next book is a new book in a series, and it sounds so addicting, and that is The Jasad Heir, and this is the first book to the Scorched Throne, and this comes out July 18th, and the setup and premise of this sounds delicious and kind of hints at some of my favorite tropes, but of course we'll see how things play out. This is an Egyptian-inspired fantasy tale, and we follow our main character, who is the last last remaining heir to the previous kingdom. 10 years ago, the kingdom of Jasad burned. Every member of the royal family was murdered, magic was outlawed, and only one person survived this terrible event, and that is our main character. Ever since then, she has been a runaway. She has been hiding, living in small villages, just trying to keep her head down. However, though, due to a series of events, she's basically forced to make a deal with her greatest enemy to basically survive, and this enemy just happens to be a prince of the current ruling family. Again, I'm really curious to see how this book is going to unfold. I feel like there is quite an opportunity for some great back and forth, as well as lots and lots of action. It also appears to be a little bit of a chunkier fantasy release, which I personally always get very excited about. This is one I definitely want to try to read as soon as possible. The next book sounds amazing, and honestly, it might be one of my favorite books of the year. I just have a feeling about it, but we'll just have to wait and see. And that is The Sun and the Void, and this book comes out July 25th. This is said to be a lyrical and lush fantasy tale inspired by the folklore of South America. In the story, we follow the journey of two young women. The first is desperate, saved by her grandmother's magic while she was on the brink of death. She feels like she will do anything to help her grandmother out, even answer the bidding of a god who calls on her in her sleep. The other is Ava, who is unwanted. She has been shunned by her family because magic calls to her, and no matter how hard she tries to not answer the call, she seemingly is failing. It appears these two girls go on a quest together. This is said to be a sweeping epic fantasy of colonialism, ancient magic, and two young women's quest for belonging, and I am so excited to pick this book up. I feel like it's going to be beautiful. Alrighty, folks, we are officially moving on to the month of August, starting out with Thorn Hedge by T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher has quickly become one of my all-time favorite authors. Her ability to write fairy tale stories are just so entrancing. I also feel like she often really turns like well-known tales on their head, and that is exactly what it appears she's doing with Thorn Hedge, which just sounds so strange. First line is, "There's a princess trapped in a tower. This isn't her story." This is a book about a kind-hearted, toad-shaped woman and a knight. The story follows our main character, Toadling, and at her birth, she was basically swept away to fairyland and raised by fairies, where she actually had a pretty nice childhood. They were really nice to her there, though obviously the land of fairies is not a very straightforward place. Once she reaches age, though, they basically give her a quest to go back to the human world, where she's supposed to offer a blessing and protect a human child. Nothing with fairies is ever simple. Centuries later, a knight approaches a towering wall of brambles where the thorns are as thick as your arm and as sharp as swords. He's heard there's a curse here that needs breaking, but it's a curse Toadling will do anything to uphold. And that is what the synopsis says. Like, it's very strange and peculiar. I'm not even totally sure exactly what this book is about, but I love T. Kingfisher's writing. She writes such delightful and cozy and heartwarming tales, but also really sticks to the heart of like fairy tales, which I'm just always a huge fan of. So I can't wait to read this. I can't wait to figure out what the world is even about, because the synopsis gives a lot, but gives a little at the same time. The next book that's on my list is The Water Outlaws, which comes out August 22nd. And this book is actually inspired by classic martial arts literature, which makes me feel like the combat writing in this is going to be superb. And this story follows our main character, Lynn. And for many years, Lynn was the expert arms instructor for the Imperial Army. Lynn herself was always fine living within the expected social hierarchies of the time, never really trying to push any boundaries, just determined to do her job and do it well. Until one day, a powerful man with a vendetta tears her life apart. She's also being pursued by a marshal who will stop at nothing until he gets his revenge, until one day she stumbles upon an unlikely group of bandits and joins their ranks. They're cutthroats, they're criminals, but they're also a group who loves each other very much, giving me like Robin Hood vibes, but also like, let's tear down this imperial system. It also has really early buzz, and I'm completely obsessed with the cover. Obviously, I have to talk about He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan, which comes out August 22nd. This is already pre-ordered. This, of course, is the sequel to She Who Became the Sun, one of my favorite books of the year when it came out a few years ago. The series is described as Mulan meets A Song of Achilles, which I actually feel like is rather accurate. It's a historical fantasy story following a variety of characters, but I would say our main character is a character named Zhu. At the beginning of the first book, she is a young, poor orphan living in a very poor town, and after the tragic passing of her family, she basically takes on the identity of her brother to kind of move easier through the world. She gets an education and gets wrapped up in a rebellion, all presenting herself as a man in this world too. The first book was excellent. I mean, so much could be said about the plot, the story, the exploration of identity and sexuality in the context of the historical time period. Everything was amazing. I can't wait for the next book. I will be reading it right away. It comes out in August. And the last book that is on my list comes out August 8th, and that is Masters of Death by Olivia Blake. Olivia Blake is obviously a very well-known author. She wrote the Atlas Six, and I believe this is actually a self-published work that has been out for quite a few years now, but it's getting a beautiful new hardcover edition and coming out again August 8th via Tor Books. Honestly, this book sounds really quirky and a lot of fun and kind of an unexpected plot direction, I would assume, from this author, which makes me really, really intrigued. This book follows our main character, who is a real estate agent, a struggling real estate agent at that, and who's also a vampire. And they are really struggling selling their new property, and they desperately need to do so. But the reason why they're struggling is because it's haunted, and the ghost is not going to vacate this property until their murder is solved. So then our main character turns to a medium he's pretty sure is an absolute fraud, but then they get roped into this quest together, and I think things begin to sort of spiral out of control from there. This sounds funny and cheeky, and I really love the combination of supernatural creatures here, and I just love the idea of a vampire real estate agent. Like, I heard that and I was honestly sold. This cover is beautiful. It's definitely on my list, and I'm very, very intrigued by this. Alrighty guys, those are my most anticipated fantasy releases for this summer. Please let me know down below some books you're really looking forward to, as I would love to know. And I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye!